Thank you for staying with us on KTN Sunrise Live. It is Wednesday and we discuss matters of gender, and we'll be telling you why we're discussing this today. Very important. First of all, it's Wednesday. That means it's perspective night tonight, and we'll be telling you why it is so important. Osonto on Twitter, you ask, what's the topic of the day? Well, today we're discussing how we report matters of gender, and you do know that a lot of the stories that you read about in the newspaper, hear on the radio, or watch on television do shape the discussions that we have in our different spaces. It could be in church, it could be at the bar, it could be at the workplace. And so today we're taking a look at some of those stories, how they've helped to shape issues surrounding gender for both men and women, and indeed what we can do better. Yes, what we're doing well and what we can continue to do better, because of course this is a discussion that we have all the time. Njoki Karuoya remains from our previous session, and drum rolls, please, joining me for the first time. Sitting in a rather awkward position, because I'm sure he's used to being where I'm sitting right now, is Allan, who's our features editor, and he and his team are responsible for some of the great features that you see: Perspective, Jaramandia, Flesh of My Flesh, Survivor Series. A lot of what you see here is done by him and his team, and so obviously he knows about the stories that we cover. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
It's good to have you here. This will be interesting. Good morning. Yeah. Right, so let's just start with you, John. When we're doing, the features that we do, and it's a story that would focus on men or women in whatever fashion, we get this whole thing of gender, and that's focusing on women. So let's just demystify this here, because every time we also have this discussion with Njoki, it's all about, gender is all about women. Let's help correct that.
Well, it goes beyond the media. I think that gender, it started with the media, but that narrative is something that is so popular that we talk about in our homes. Like I was telling you guys before we went on air, my wife was laughing at me because she knows that I know absolutely nothing about women, despite the fact that
you're married to one.
Yes, I'm married to one, and the discussion I'm coming to have is one about gender. And gender doesn't necessarily mean that we're focusing on women. It has to do with both sexes. So I think we need to start there by disabusing ourselves first in the media of the notion that gender is purely about women, even though a lot of times it tends to skew that way because of the kind of inequalities that we have in our societies. And start from there, and start from building stories on a blank page, on a blank slate. I always like to tell reporters that the closer that you get to people, the closer you get to a story. And when it comes to doing feature stories, whether they are about specific issues to do with a specific gender or not, the fact is that it has to be able to reach across both genders and appeal to both the man and the woman. So if we start from thinking about stories from that point of view, that the audiences that we have are both men and women, then we'll be able to start to cover gender more objectively and stop making it just about
women. Do you think we sometimes do that we skew, maybe when you're writing your articles, that you're speaking to women only? When we do a story regarding women, that we are targeting women only? Do you think maybe could that be a problem on our part, or is it a perception? When someone sees gender or sees a story on women, they just say, okay, well, that's not for me.
I think, like John said, a lot of that narrative, I think, also started with us, because when we talk about gender, people tend to imagine it's not the lifestyle issues. They know gender is not about the lifestyle issues, because that's a whole different, but they see it as women activism, that women want more power, they want more rights, and so they're using that, gender. So people, when they hear gender, it's almost like this is feminist stuff. And so the association, because of the fact that when the gender, activism began, it was about writing the balance. So when you're writing the balance, you focus on the imbalanced, and it was women. So we're looking at, the right to girl child education. We're looking at elimination of early marriage, elimination of FGM, elimination of domestic violence, increasing the numbers in parliament, increasing the numbers in governance, increasing the numbers in management. Now you can see. So we rarely got to hear about, what are the issues that are affecting men as well. And now, until, Mendelea wanaume, came up and started,
and I like that because we're going to talk about that reaction in just a minute.
I started talking about the inequalities that, that boys have been forgotten. The girl child education campaign has gone on to the expense of the boy. That boys now are not going. Some boys are not going to school, but we're not talking about it. In pastoralist communities, you have the boys are the ones who are going out with the cows, but we're not talking about that. We're still focusing on the girls and saying no. The girls should not be left at home to do chores, but to go to school. So I guess now it's good to have this conversation, because then we also just even as journalists, we just need to look at really, are we part of the stereotype? Are we pushing the stereotype? Or can we begin to right that wrong and look at issues in terms of how do they affect both men and women, both boys and girls? If you're talking about education, the famous laptop project. Are we talking about, is it affecting both girls? How will the distribution be like when you're talking about
boys,
exactly
for girls? Only.
So and you know what? So what he says, we need to put start looking at these stories from a blank, and I think that's what we call gender mainstreaming. When we begin to start looking at issues and how they affect both, and telling that story.
Okay.
Yeah. So that even when you're talking about rape or defilement, the impact of the impact is always on the girl, and the shock factor is, but we don't see how does this affect the family.
The family as a whole.
How does the father feel about the fact that his little girl has been defiled so badly by a fellow man?
That's right.
And what can men do about this? When we're talking about mentorship, we focus a lot about mentoring girls. And we forget to tell the stories of men also mentoring men. So that when that has been excluded, the impression that our readers, our listeners, our viewers have is that mentorship is only being done to girls. And it's because we have not told the other story, that there are these church groups that are doing this, like in Eastlands, telling men how to be men. There are those movements, but we don't get to hear them.
Yes, indeed. And I think, John, then what you said about when we go out to do stories, that we say, connect with, shall we say, the human being, and not necessarily the man or the woman. When we talk about a case where someone has been raped or defiled, would we say we're guilty of focusing on, would usually focus on the mother and on the girl herself, and you just talk about now how her life has been changed forever. We hardly ever see the man or the father or the uncle or the guardian or whoever, is the father figure in that case.
Yeah, that's because most times, and rightly so, in cases of rape, the man is portrayed as the antagonist, as the monster who would do this to children. However, women also have men around them that help shape their lives and are involved in their lives. For instance, I mean, I'm married, I've got a daughter. If, God forbid, something like that were to happen to my wife or to my daughter, I'd have some very strong feelings about that. And like Njoki said, that there's also an issue in how we portray things like that happen to men. I can tell you for a fact that have a conversation with a man about rape, and that's one of the most difficult and one of the most painful conversations that you will ever have, ever, because men are supposed to be the patriarchs, they're supposed to be strong, and they're supposed to be able to defend themselves in positions like that. But oftentimes you find that doesn't happen. So in the media, yes, we tend to slant that way, because a lot of people out there, a lot of men out there are doing us as men a disservice by going out and raping young girls and young boys. But the story needs to be told in a very wholesome fashion. It goes to, like in terms of TV and print to an extent. It goes to it goes to the question of time and space to be able to tell our stories to conclusion. But it also goes to the fact that, like I said earlier, we have a narrative. We have a script that has been written for us generations past by the people who came before us, and therefore we feel uncomfortable if we stray from it just a little bit. But the truth is, as a journalist, if you're following the facts, if you're following the story, then you're never going to stray from being able to tell both sides of it, or all sides of it.
Indeed. And when we focused on issues like maternal health, and that is a huge one. Obviously, when we're talking about maternal health, we will be talking about the women.
Yes.
You know, we had a story that was done by Angel Katusia and Saida Swale when they went to Namu, and they were taking a look at just what Uhuru Kenyatta's promise would mean, you know, to the women there who are, you know, preparing to give life. And so let's talk about stories like those ones, which are very specific. The considerations, perhaps in a story like that and others.
The consideration in a story like one that Angel and Saida did about maternal health would be how, of course, primarily it affects the mother, the person who's going to deliver this child and put them in this world. But the things that affect both of us. For instance, if I'm a father that's waiting for my wife to deliver, finance is going to be a big issue that's going to be top of mind. You know, there's going to be issues like should I get a bigger home for my child? How am I going to be able to provide school fees for my child? That's the way men think. Men think in structures and in numbers and very logically. In terms of the progression of this child's life from A to Z, there also are issues. They might be secondary to the very important issue of maternal health and how the government is subsidizing mothers and that sort of thing. But the family structure needs to be taken into account when we do these kinds of stories. It might be to the tail end, but it must make a mention in these kinds of stories.
Yes, but that one is important. And when we're talking about maternal health, we cannot help focusing on the woman, the mother.
We focus on the mother because that is the way we have been conditioned to think. That when we're talking about maternal health, it's about pregnancies and women.
Yes.
And yet, we forget to tell the story of the men who now do not have to fork money to pay. Because usually they're the ones who pay.
There you go.
We have not told that story about how it has relieved the burden for men to then, you know, pay the maternity fees, because this was one of the challenges why men were not allowing their women to go and deliver in health centers because of that you know, the cost factor. Now that has been removed, they're able now to rechannel those resources into other areas in the home, and those are the stories we are not telling. And yet that it's a gender issue. So every story that we have, if we look at it correctly with a gender lens, then obviously we're going to see, you know, how any issue affects both sexes. But then again, as journalists, we must also appreciate that we do not work and live in a vacuum. We are part of a society that also conditions us into thinking the way we think. If I'm a male journalist and I've been conditioned to think in a certain way, then I am going to tell my stories in that way. And we cannot criticize you for doing that because you're just doing what is coming natural for you. A lot of our media houses are headed by men. So the fact that a lot of the stories are male-oriented, the ones that we call the hard stuff, it cannot be blamed on that, because if the roles were reversed and it was the women who were in charge, chances are the stories that would be making it to the top would have a women, you know, a women lens. And so it's just us as journalists then, you know, getting out of our comfort zones and telling those other stories, which we have done very well and effected change. If we look at the stories that we're talking about, girl child education, that has increased the numbers. If you look at the numbers, it has increased the numbers in tertiary level. And now we're seeing, you know, the affirmative action in the university level where the rates are lower. We're telling those stories. We've been telling stories of women in business, women in leadership, women in management. Those stories have been done by journalists who have seen there's that imbalance. We have told stories of men in domestic abusing relationships. We have told those stories, and we have created a spotlight on the fact that a lot of men could be abused in their homes, but they're not talking about it. And we have people talking about it. We had that agitation about boys being sidelined in this gender activism. We've told the story, and now we know about it. So we like I said, we live in a society. We hear the stories in the society. Sometimes we actually follow our own, you know, prejudices. But we always, you know, because news is continuous, we always tell these stories. So we just need to maybe keep hammering the fact that gender is not about women. Gender is about men and women, and how issues affect the roles that have been, given to the men and women.
Indeed, and like you say, in many cases we do what comes naturally. I mean, we're only human beings, and we bring that to the workplace sometimes, rightfully or not, intentionally or not. What's the brief then when we're speaking with our journalists? Because it is only natural, it is only human.
That's a difficult one, because it's not just a fact of where you grew up. It's also, and let's be frank about it, it also comes down to physiology sometimes, as in it comes down to what a woman physically can do or can't do. Yeah, that's why in Kenya, for instance, although I think this is a socialization issue, you don't find a lot of female reporters going out and doing stories about the war in Somalia, save for Judy Kosgei, who I think is a fantastic journalist.
And an exception.
And an exception. But I'd say that, like I said earlier, I mean, this is the central thesis of how that guides me on how I do things. If the story is important, it can be told by anybody, whether a man or a woman, and ladies need to start thinking about that from the point of view that I am, especially in our industry, I am a journalist first. I might be a woman, but when I walk in the door, I am a journalist. I leave a lot of that aside
the door,
and focus on being a vessel through which a story is told. And vessels are things that can hold very many things. You understand? Because you're a woman, that doesn't mean that you can speak about a sporting issue. Another journalist, Michelle Katami, who works for KISS, is a fantastic sports reporter, and she happens to report on a sport that I love, rugby. which is a very male sport. You understand? However, because of the way she reports, you often find a very interesting slant or very interesting perspective on how she brings things out, because yes, whereas she might be the vessel through which these stories are being told, she's also a woman, and she also has a specific way of looking
at the sport.
At the sport.
That's right.
And it's refreshing, and I only wish that a lot more women would look at our profession that way and stop trying to typecast themselves into this role that it is only a humanistic or a story with a softer edge that. And we move forward very quickly if we're able to do that.
Indeed, and just when you said that, I recalled the two instances when we had. I remember when Sophia Wanuna went to Baragoy. She went with Moha, and I just kept thinking, oh my God, Sophia.
I had the same feeling.
I kept thinking, oh gosh, Sophia. And I will say this because I'm a woman and I'm guilty as charged, and I just kept asking myself, so how's Sophia taking care of herself? Like, she's been there for a week. Has she done her hair? I mean, and I'm sorry, I'm a female, and these are some of the things that we think about. And I just kept thinking, okay, could she have had a little bit more makeup in that shot? But she is in Baragoy, for heaven's sake. So obviously, but the funny thing is I didn't think the same of Mohammed. I just he's a guy, he'll roll with the punches and he'll get that.
And an interesting story about that, because I actually covered that assignment as well. Sophia, and well, I'm not going to mention who, there were a bunch of journalists that were going up that hill to go down. Sophia was right at the head of that pack with Moha. There were other guys, other cameramen who were there lugging their equipment.
And she was right there.
She was right there, in flats, no less. That was something that I personally admired. But what you say is so true, because women think that a woman is supposed to present herself in a certain fashion and should be in certain locations when reporting. We'll be like, oh my gosh, she's in Baragoy.
I know. I kept thinking, but why couldn't she report from, here?
From where?
Like
from
the town.
And then talk about the people who are left behind.
And hand over to Mohammed, what's happening down in the valley.
We can't expect that from Moha, but then you see some. And this is the thing about other women, like Sophia, but on an international level, who've we've managed to break those barriers and bring those news. People like Christiana.
And there's a new one, Our Damon.
Yes, Our Damon does a lot of frontline
Libya
reporting.
And Syria and yes.
And she's in jeans and clothes and helmets and you don't. In fact, if you see Christiana without lipstick or whatever, it's perfect. It's fine. It's
that's her.
In fact, that's her in her exactly. That's her in her element.
Yeah. And because I was also just some conversations. I wouldn't say everything, but I was when Asha Muli did the story of the gangs, and she did it with Dennis, and she also said that was out of her comfort zone because we don't expect women to be reporting about crime, about gangsters and going undercover and going to Suguta Valley and that sort of thing. So it's also perhaps a stereotype that we have, and so we say women should only report on gender issues and women, and not even just the hard stories like on the front lines, but it's also generally believed in our sector that women can't do hard news, you can't do political, although of course we're starting to see a lot of that. But do you think that stereotype also still exists with our viewers at home? When it's a big interview and you see a woman, you think, well, okay.
I don't, well, in Kenya, and just speaking about mainstream media, I don't think that exists anymore because of people like you. Because you're the person who's conducting the hard interview, and we see you every day because of Julie Gishuru, because of Anne Kiguta. And I mean, there are all sorts of women in every media house that are there and taking the big questions and delivering them to, and holding people to account. So I don't think to a large extent that exists anymore, at least not to me.
Okay.
However, I'm not just I'm not every viewer, so I can't discount the fact that maybe there would be some men who would prefer a man sitting down and slogging it out with another man or with some person in power. I can't discount that there would be that notion in the public. I don't think that it should be there, nor do I think that it exists much anymore.
I'll give you an example, and I don't know if, Njoki, you found this. There was that time when we had Raila Odinga, the deputy president, and the president doing their rounds in the media houses. And then when Julie Gishuru did an interview, she was too soft and she's too nice. And then when Anne Kiguta did an interview, she should have some respect. And she's a woman, she's talking to the deputy president. And there's those, gets to the point where it's hard to tell, what we really want. And these are two women, so it's a great comparison, doing their interviews in somewhat different fashions. And maybe this is, their personality, this is what they bring to the table. Njoki, your thoughts on that?
I think that is part of that stereotype I was talking about, the prejudice, where we tend to imagine that perhaps men would have a different way of asking the questions, which could be true, but we also have our own way of asking questions and getting certain information that perhaps my brother John here will not get, because he'll be relating to the interviewer
in a different way
as a man. And I'm trying to get that information in the best way that I can. So I think what we need to appreciate is that these are two different styles of interviewing, but at the end of the day, did you get the information you wanted? Did she bring out the information that we all needed as Kenyans? Did we get to hear responses from the hard questions that we wanted? Because you see, your hard question can be, shot from the hip. Mine, I might, repackage it with some flowers. But if I'm still getting the results. If you're still getting to know whether I'm still bitter from the results of the election, or what is the plan with this laptop, or why aren't we paying the teachers, if at the end of the day that question has been answered,
that's what counts.
I think that's what is enough. Whether I laugh through that interview is irrelevant. It's just my style. So I think we also need to appreciate that as individuals, we also have our own individual styles of conducting interviews, of doing stories. Sometimes people see, for instance, Moha going out into the field to do an investigative piece. He has his way. Somebody else goes and does another investigative piece, and they're saying, but this guy, this is his style, based on his individuality and the way he knows how to tell a story. And at the end of the day, it is the results. Have you learned something from this story? Are we able to, have we set the agenda? Have we, highlighted an ill in the society that needs to be resolved? So I think often when I look at those comments, I'm like, you know, these are just haters. Put them in the interviews.
Yes. So it's the idea of, you know, just appreciating that people are different, including women. I mean, we can be different from each other. Do you think sometimes we're all just lumped as we're women, we're nice, we're sweet, and you know, and that we feel
all act the same, talk the same.
Yes.
Sometimes the sweetness is what brings out the because it disarms you. It can disarm you to the point of saying something you should not have said.
There you go. Okay, so just appreciating the different styles. Could be for men, could be for women, but you know, everybody has a different approach to it. The point is whether we get the results, you know, out there. Let's talk about taking our story from. So I've just told the story, and this is what it is, to doing something about it, particularly when we have some of those, you know, gender stories that either would affect men, in many cases, that affect women, because we've talked about those inequalities that continue to exist. John, we'll get to Njoki in a moment because she's taken it beyond. Do you ever get to a point, you know, when we do a story, when we're talking about, you know, flesh of my flesh, the women in prostitution, and does it sometimes just feel guilty to report about this and walk away? You know, and not impact their lives in any way. Sometimes it seems like it's to our advantage. We tell this great story. Do we have the cases where reporters are thinking, I want to do something, and I should, not just tell the story?
All the time. I mean, our profession is such that it is opportunistic in nature, and we need to accept that and own that, because we take the opportunity to tell other people's stories, and our profiles are either built or destroyed on how we do that.
Okay.
However, I mean, all the time, I've personally faced that dilemma a lot of times, where you go from this very heart-wrenching story and you tell it and people react, and you're thinking, I need to do something about it. A great example is Jaramandia la Uhalifu, when Mohammed did the story of Serone, the person who killed, I think it was Wanogo.
Wanogo, yes. Oh,
it was Wanogo.
Wanogo, yes.
Yeah, and the subsequent victimization that he faced in the police force, him being shot and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
I mean, Moha, I can tell because I happened to be in the field with him at the time that the story was running, and he felt very strongly about it, and he told people, he asked the management whether people can contribute, and the contribution was made, and Serone is well on his way to becoming to getting better. That said, there is a barrier between us as reporters and the public for a reason. There's a saying that I heard in some training that I attended, that you should never fall in love with a story, which is extremely difficult to do, because every story that you do should be important to you.
Yes.
But not to the extent that you would compromise objectivity or balance in the pursuit of righting some wrong that you see in that story.
Right.
A lot of times that can blur the way you tell a story. It can color the way you tell a story, and the effect that you'd want the story to have isn't had, because you're thinking, okay, gosh, I mean, this is such a sad story. Let's tell the story in this certain way, and then help this person and build this narrative about the victim and the suffering that this person has undergone, without taking into account that there is a whole other ecosystem that exists around this person that needs to be spoken about.
That's right.
So I mean, it's a very difficult balance. I think we need to tell our stories first, get that out of the way, and then think about how we can contribute and how we can shape the lives of the people that we've told these stories about, and then move forward. That I think is something that can work.
Okay. You do it a little differently. You take
Actually,
it beyond,
I agree with what he says. The story first has to come out. I mean, in all the issues that we do, first and foremost, it's the issues that come out. And you've noticed sometimes, even as an organization, we select some of the stories where we even ask people, we go out of our way and say, for this particular story, if you want to assist, this is. And there's some cases when as an organization you pick, but after the story has been told, and say that, and then you even follow some of the interventions that as an organization you have taken, and the changes that it has made to a family. in my case, what we do is, in terms of the issues that we've been covering under the umbrella of gender, is that then you appreciate that one of the big gaps that we have as women and as girls is lack of information. And it is because of that that then we started this mentorship program, where what you're doing is based on our, leveraged position as journalists, where we have a lot of access to information, is that now we're taking that information out to the schools and to the women, because that information cannot be contained within the pages of a newspaper. The information is too much. And a lot of stories get axed because of their timeliness and the fact that, there's not sufficient space. So what we do is, when we go out, we go with role models, we go with profiles that we've written about previously, and we've inspired Kenyans based on the stories, the things that they have done. And we work with them and try to, sambaza this information, so that even you at your level, whether you're in primary school, in high school, in college, when you're making your decisions, they are based on information. You are armed with information, so you can make the right decision. That, however, doesn't mean that when you mess up, we're not going to come to you and tell the story. And even when we tell, stories about the mentorship, is we basically cover. We say XYZ was here and this is what they talked about, without necessarily going into, oh, she's so lovely, she's this, she's that. Because should you, John reports that you were caught in an embezzlement scam.
Yes.
We shall talk about that. I mean,
Okay. So using that, but without necessarily, getting caught up in the middle of it. And that's important. When we were talking earlier about, mentorship, and you said that, we have all these women, and every time we talk about mentorship, and remember when we had, a panel of men here just talking about mentoring boys, and many people continue to say, but we don't see the role models, male role models. Are we then guilty of not painting that picture, and saying, because with women, we say Tabitha Karanja, we say, we have all these names that are out there, and we see them. Do we not report about the men, who are out there, the role models? Or
before
is that already there?
Because before you answer that, one, we did realize that challenge at Woman.
Yes.
And we're saying, people are saying that all we do is highlight about women. And where the male role models. So we started this page called Main Man, where now would identify, and sometimes would even come people like John and ask, can you help, hook us up? And sometimes we even follow their stories. And we see an outstanding story that they have done, and we're like, we need to cover that person. We need to provide a profile of that individual, so that even our women readers, can get to see the top men, and provide a different female angle to this profile that is not hard-hitting. So we are looking at how did he get to where he did, what are the challenges, and then we also look at his family and his role as a family man.
All right. So painting it, in a little different way. John?
I think men are victims of excess in this way. Men have been reported about as captains of industry, as the people at the frontier, riding the crest of the wave of technology or sport and that sort of thing for a very long time. So we already have our icons very firmly in place, and it's very hard to remove them. So that when a new person comes up, it's very hard for them to dislodge the icons that we've set ourselves, who have been set up, or take a space there. Because for every Mugo Kibati, there is a Vimal Shah. For every so and so, and there's a such and such. You understand? And that is, again, because we followed a narrative. But I think we need to drill down on what the basics are about who an icon, not an icon, who a role model is, who a person that should be emulated is, and from there we'll be guided to all sorts of new people, or even the same old people that we've reported about, but in a different light.
Okay, all right. Gosh, we've almost done an hour. Here's a great text from Eric, and it just gives an example of how we report these issues. The bride-to-be was shot, in the city on Monday, and we've talked about her, we've talked about her family and how tragic this is, and we now know her brother-in-law passed on. Nobody's mentioning he had a family, this is what it was like for him. Do you think then that also, we're guilty of that? We've talked about a bride, look at her, she left 4 children, and how tragic it is for her, and it is. But, the brother-in-law also probably had a family, and...
It's a less sexy story. Yeah, it's so unfortunate that I am saying this, but I'm speaking on behalf of journalists who would think in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, a bride, she's going to wear this white gown and go and say her vows before man and God.
Yeah.
And some cruel person took that away from her by killing her. Yeah, the less sexy story, if you compare it, is the fact that there was a man who lost his life.
Yeah.
He had a family. He had that sort of thing. And unfortunately, that, because even the way our society is structured, if he was a patriarch, that means that his family is going to go through immense suffering.
That's right.
Immense suffering, immense pain. And we need to be able to start focusing on those issues in order for us to sort of step back from the leaders, the things that, the hooks, the things that are going to get people interested in the stories, and tell the stories to their conclusion, or at least tell them in certain ways that people can put the pieces together. And give people an understanding that, look, that there was a bride that was killed, and it is unfortunate, and it is very sad. There was this other man who also died, and it is unfortunate in this way. That is the duty that we have as reporters, to be able to do that and tell it to conclusion, not just stick with the line that's going to get the most viewers.
And the most emotion,
and
the one that
evoke the most emotion.
The one that pulls at your heartstrings, and you're thinking, quite sad. That being said, even as we do reporting, make it free and fair, and look at the whole picture, it is still fair to say that there are inequalities, that exist in our society, which is why, and I want to talk about what's happening tonight, on Perspective. Tell us what to expect.
Well, Perspective tonight is looking at the issue of HIV and AIDS, but from a slightly different perspective. We are, without talking too much about it, we are looking at the lives of traditional birth attendants in Wingi, and how they've been affected by HIV and AIDS. Some of them as old as 70 years old contracted the virus while delivering children. But the story really isn't about them as women, but them as people who are the unintended victims, that were the collateral damage that from an ecosystem of poverty, of absentee husbands, of women who have no choice but to go and sleep with other men, and from the fact that our medical fraternity just isn't getting deep enough into our rural areas to provide the things that we need to ensure that these things persist and survive in an ecosystem that's safe. Because traditional birth attendants are going to be there whether you like it or not. Right now, there's a huge movement for home births in the States and in the West. Which is something that should be encouraged. But you see, here we look down on it as something that only poor people do. It is a choice that people should have, and we just need to make that choice safe. So that's generally what the line of thinking and perspective behind Perspective was. And as a man, it was really out of my comfort zone doing the story. But at the same time, it helped me refresh something that I had in me when I started, which was to tell very human and very personal stories. So,
and that's exactly what we've been talking about, that we don't only see you in Somalia and in Mogadishu, but we can also see you in a different setting, telling a story that many would not expect you to tell. Yes. And when we talk about traditional birth attendants, and I know you're huge on this one, and we've talked about this before, particularly about midwifery in this country, and the shocking statistics. I find it ironic that in the West people opt for this, while here it is the one thing that majority of Kenyans do simply because they have no other choice.
But in the West now, it's something sexy. It's a trend. You see, when something is a trend, then people follow it. And usually, even when you're talking about home births in the West, it is delivered by a health professional. It's just that the health professional gets out of the hospital and comes to your house for extra pay.
Yes.
Because this is a home visit. Here, on the other hand, the story of the traditional birth attendant has to continuously be told, because you see what we keep forgetting is that majority of Kenyans are poor.
Yeah.
In as much as we have towns and we have people who look like they are loaded and that Kenyans seem to have money to spend, majority of Kenyans are poor. If you go to the rural areas, the health centers are so far away from homes that when somebody starts getting into labor, the last thing they want to be told is get onto a cart. We rush you over this bumpy road to the health center.
Like what we did in Namu. Apparently, people are on those dingy boats for hours and hours getting from one of the islands to Namu.
So isn't it better that you and in fact even that story, what they said is that the woman eventually delivered on the boat, but one of them died, either the mother or the child, but there was a death. And so the traditional birth attendants have really saved millions of women's lives, and we have to state that. And perhaps maybe what we need to be looking at is the quality of their skills up to par, and then what can we do to get it there? Because even in Namu, you saw the woman who was massaging, and was saying they'd rather, that they call her. Even when the health center is there, because they were even saying the challenges that are in the health center.
You get there, there's no doctors, no equipment.
So these are realities of life, and therefore we need to face those realities, which we do with exposés like this one, and then figure out how can we deal with this. How can we deal with this population that does not have access to the health center? Is it that we build maternity homes where women who are so far away from the health center can then come to those, maternity homes and stay there for a month until they deliver, then they go back? Because that's the other trend that the ministry has also set up, where they're putting up maternity homes, safe maternity homes. And now the challenge that has come to them is that some of these mothers are saying, can I come with my children? Because if I am here for a month waiting to deliver, or 2 weeks, my home is suffering. So those are those realities that we have to confront, and then we have to talk about it, we have to highlight them, and then, seek solutions.
Okay. My final question before we conclude is regarding how we carry ourselves as media practitioners to be able to tell the stories that we do as men and as women, because we live in a society that, objectifies women. I mean, there's the softer sex, and, and we have the harder men and whatnot. But maybe even particularly for women, and how we present ourselves, and we're telling a story, say, I don't know, randomly on prostitution in the country, and, there's, you get where I'm going with this. There's a look, there's a way we present ourselves, and we'll get to men in a moment, but how do we sometimes contribute to that stereotype that we are trying so much to get rid of?
This is a very extreme example, but it'll drive my point home. Right before the genocide in 1994, and right before most genocides that have occurred worldwide, there was an objectification of the people who were to be eliminated as less than, as being these objects that are less than human. And to a small extent, dressing in a certain way, being over made up when you're presenting the news, for instance, does that to women, because it takes the focus away from you telling someone else's story. Remember, we are vessels. It takes the focus away from you telling someone else's story, or asking the intelligent questions and having those questions linger in the minds of men and women at home, rather than, that's an interesting fashion trend. My gosh, that dress is tight.
Yes.
And there'll be men who'll enjoy it at home, because men are visual creatures, and I guess to an extent that panders to what men want. But at the end of the day, do you want to be remembered as this person who wore this fantastic dress on the bulletin, or the person who was able to put issues front and center and presented them and represented the public in the best light by being the vessel through which good, relevant, strong questions are asked, and the right answers are drawn from your interviewers? Do you want that? So I think women anchors, female anchors, should be able to ask themselves that question. And more often than not, I think they'll come to the conclusion, which I have come to, is that you want to be the sort of person through which a story is told.
Not being the story.
Exactly.
Not being the story.
Of course, stories have packaging, and so you must be presented properly.
Yes.
But it's often more disappointing when you have a beautifully wrapped present and there's a lump of coal inside. You understand? So I think without going too far down that line, that the women at home should take note.
Do you think we've gotten to the point where persons in the news and reporters, anchors, and the people that tell these stories are themselves objectified, and they themselves become the story? And I'll tell you what, John, it's not just the men, but because it's a trend, the women also. I mean, I've been somewhere where people are flipping channels. Let's see who's wearing today. Oh, that's a nice dress. Okay. Oh, that's.
But are we seeing the effect of that? The effect of that then is that people are not listening to the stories.
That's right.
They're looking at the anchors and then creating stories about the anchors when the stories are supposed to be about something else. I mean, it's like modeling. In the modeling industry, they say that the model should not smile. When you're walking out to do the catwalk and everything, you need to, just have a stone face, because at the end of the day, what you are is a hanger. You're being paid to be a hanger, to sell the dress. And I think part of this is also our fault, because we are the ones who are pandering to the to the public, desire to see these women look as sexy as possible. And then what that does, that it gives these female anchors the pressure to always look better than the last time. And better than the next listening to the stories. So like he says, I think maybe what we need to do is perhaps revise this, because even in the West, we have the women, they actually look good, but you'll see the hairstyles are almost the same. The kind of outfits they wear, the jewelry is totally, it's not
very
out
understated.
there. It's very understated. And even the way they tell the story, it's like they're an extension of the reporter. They really understand the subject of the story, and they tell it in the best way possible. So as you're seeing her, you're hearing what she's saying, and seeing the story. So I think we then again, this is an industry, we are growing. So those are we've come from, perhaps that was the way to go. We went that way. We are seeing the effect of going that way. So then it's always about,
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. These also are growing pains. You can't discount that. I mean, I'm sure in a couple of years we'll have people who are more focused on what they want to say rather than what they want to look like. And like she said, it's important for us to also recognize that is also part of a growing industry's troubles, if you call it that.
But yes, definitely something worth looking into and correcting ourselves as we go, because it's also a learning curve. I think the media is. Well, we say we can't even compare it to the West. I mean, they've been doing this a long time, and we're just slowly getting there. Right. So we'll start with you, Njoki. Your final words on this one, on just how we can help to shape the discussions in future, and how we can tell stories that would have an appeal to both men and women, boys and girls, young and old, and rich and poor, and everybody in between.
Okay. I think thus far we've been doing a great job. I mean, we can see even just from the effects of the current election, the past election, where we have more numbers, we have special women's seats, we are now covering the clamoring for youth participation. Young people are saying, hello, I mean, we form the bulk of this population. How come we're not, equitably represented in this country, in governance? But I think, like we said earlier, if we could continue having this conversation about gender and letting Kenyans appreciate that gender is not about women, but it's about men. And we in the media houses, if we can now begin to also just gender mainstream our stories. So if we're talking about the governor and the senator, we're also talking about the women representative, because they're at that national level. And what they're bringing on board. When we speak about the comptroller, it's not about her as a female, but as her in her position, and then the fact that as that position, she's been quite firm, and it's not about her as a woman. Perhaps it could be as a result, but we're seeing a woman who is just as firm as, say, Mika Cheserem, and saying, hello, this is our Kenyan budget. I mean, these are our Kenyan monies, and we need to use them well. So I think as the media, we just need to open up the space, which we have, and the Standard Group has done an excellent job in terms of opening up the space for women. We're hearing more women-related stories, more, girls-related stories, and I would say here, the space is almost equal. And Kenyans are having these conversations about the rights of women, the power that women have, the perspectives that women bring into governance and management and all that. And also we're getting men who are being more understanding, more appreciative of the capacity of women. And we're not looking at things now as this is happening because this is a woman, this is happening because this is a man. But we're seeing people now being seen as individuals who are working at whatever sector to provide the best. And as journalists, I think our role is to continue highlighting the injustices that are in this country, whether it is for men or women, and just ensuring that we continue to help the country grow towards where I would like to be, which is to be a developed nation that respects the human rights of all, whether they are men, women, boys or girls.
Okay. John?
I think as a journalist, my advice would be to my fellow reporters is that let's look at the narratives that have been set up in gender, in any issue that we've been able to cover. Look at them, acknowledge them, but don't be guided by them to the exclusion of what the story is on the ground, to the exclusion of what the facts are. That way you'll be able to tell a better story. You'll be able to tell a story that appeals more, reaches across both genders, and gives people the information that they need to move forward. About the issue that we're talking about in terms of dress, I think men are also guilty of, especially men who are on air, are also guilty of a certain amount of narcissism and self-centeredness that comes with being a man, and we need to start thinking in the same light, in the same way I had advised women to think more about the information.
Yes.
We also need to think more about the information that guides us, and that I think will keep us true to the course, and will be able to put important issues front and center. I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago on Perspective, Mashirima Kapombe had just come from Kilifi, and she had done a story on teenage pregnancies. And now, the first reaction that people would get would be like, oh my God, okay, fine, it's so sad, but yes, we've heard about it 1,000 times. But she told the story from the point of view of the young men who've had to leave school and look for employment to be able to support their sisters. If we start looking at stories from different interesting out-of-the-box perspectives, I'm sure that the public will appreciate it, and they'll move along with us in creating either a new narrative or being the society that understands things from a very holistic point of view.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. And we're looking forward to it tonight from 9:30. Anxious to see just what happens with these traditional birth attendants who in the process of giving life end up being collateral damage. And I guess, the point of every story is that one, we start a conversation, and two, we hope that some change will come from it. Right? I mean, that's really why we write the articles that we do and, air the stories that we do. Thank you both so much for being part of my panel. Njoki, Karuoya, and John Allan Namu. And we've been talking about gender and how we cover some of these issues and how we are part of the stereotypes, and what it is that happens in society, what we're talking about, and how we're talking about it. And we've just taken a very critical, hard look. We've said when it works, we've said when it doesn't. And please do look out for Perspectives tonight at 9:30 p.m. And you definitely don't want to miss what's happening in Mwingi town. We won't give away much more than that. And John Allan has been very, very cagey with that because, of course, the idea is for you to get to watch it. And, don't just watch a story and say, oh, that's sad. Let it do something, the idea is it's supposed to start a conversation. And when it starts a conversation, you've got to want to ask, what can I do? In your own personal capacity, or perhaps in saying, this is something I need to ask my member of parliament about. This is something I need to push for. This is something as an organization that I work for, we need to do something about. So it's not just to sit there and to get shocked by the statistics, but to actually get you to do something and to know a little bit better about how your fellow countrymen are living. Right, so that's our discussion this morning.